Every day, we can experience a full range of emotions, from joy to grief, peace, frustration, and everything in between.
But we're still expected to be an A player at work, be a good partner, to parent children, take care of our animals, and have food on the table, even in the throes of grief. So how the hell are we supposed to do it all?
On the Human Sessions podcast, we'll guide you through strategies for being your authentic self in every part of your life, no matter which emotions are in the driver's seat that day. We'll talk about how human design, energy, and Reiki can all be useful tools for showing up and showing up well.
And if we lost you at the word energy, I promise you will walk away from every episode with tactical tips to feel more like yourself.
I'm Rachel Hatterberg-Walt, human energetics expert and Reiki master.
And I'm Val Marini, grief and trauma specialist and energy healer. This is a no bullshit zone.
This is an anti-perfectionism haven.
This is the Human Sessions podcast.
Hey everyone, welcome back to Human Sessions. Today, Val and I are going to give you all a little bit more context to our perspective and where we're coming from various cultural lenses and experiences. And we're also going to give you some insight on how we met, how the universe brought us together, how our circles and our professional experiences brought us together today. Sound like a plan?
That sounds good.
Yeah. Well, as far as my cultural background goes, I am, middle-class white upbringing, various structures of city versus like suburban life. I was born in Denver, Colorado, actually. We lived there for a little bit. My dad was in sales, so traveling and experiencing new environments was very much part of my younger years. I've lived in big cities like Chicago. I've lived in smaller cities like Hickory, North Carolina. And, I think that diverse perspective as far as lifestyle, but also people I was around and friends that I had and things like that have, brought some different flavors to how I view the world. I mean, obviously not to mention, their environment that they created in our family home obviously contributes.
Yeah.
But, part of our family values was to go travel and explore and be open to other people's experiences. And so even when I, perhaps was in a predominantly white space, suburban, kind of small town, Western Kentucky for a lot of my life, I still had the desire to want to learn more and listen more and experience more.
Yeah. Do you feel that prepared you as like a lead-in to kind of the life and the diversity of your friendships and the diversity of your thought and just where you are today, or where you landed? Has this been a lot of work and sort of countercultural to some of that?
I think I was innately born with that. I have a South Node in Sagittarius. So for all of you, astrology newbies, that means what I'm coming to this life with kind of as a baseline. And notoriously, Sagittarius is very much travel and experience. So I think that part of my just baseline makeup is exploring more, is searching more, is having curiosity, is wanting to see the world and experience the world and diversity in that way. But my parents, I think, created an environment where that was safe and it was okay to explore different perspectives, and it was okay to travel and have different cultural experiences, whether that's, abroad outside of our country or just another state or a city versus country, or, diversity within races and ethnicities and that sort of thing. I think they just gave me the permission to know that that was okay to do that. I think when I was growing up, mostly in Kentucky, that was a little bit odd in that environment, but I never felt othered by that by any means. I mean, I'm middle class white too, so I carry that privilege, and I didn't feel like that I was stifled in any way with that. And I went to the University of Kentucky for undergrad and graduate school and studied abroad during that time, and people thought I was, maybe brave for doing that, but not necessarily with negative connotations or like a weirdo or an oddball or something like that for that. And studying abroad, and I was in Italy, studying abroad in Italy really made me who I am to a lot of degrees. I am very independent, too, but that really pushed the boundaries of my independence. being immersed in different languages like Italian and French too, a little bit. Um, really pushed the boundaries of what I thought was okay and safe and how did I get around. And I did it by myself. Um, I went to University of Kentucky, but studied through UNC Chapel Hill actually. So all the people that I was with in the program were also not people I was familiar
Yeah.
with.
Which is important. That's like an
Mhm.
important perspective to have.
Mhm. Yeah, I think it really made the experience, even more challenging in a good way on a deeper level. Because even though
Mhm.
they were, English speakers and they were from the South, we had, that kind of cultural um, overlap perspective too. It still is wildly pushing of boundaries for sure. Yeah. I
Yeah.
mean, I think one of my greatest achievements in my life is making it home from Florence, Italy to Nashville, Tennessee without any real problems by
Yeah.
myself.
That's
And I
incredible.
went, Florence to Rome, Rome to Paris, Paris to New York, New York to Nashville. Bus, train, automobile, plane, all the things. And I made it home safely in one piece with all of my things. And I tap into the resilience of that whole trip because it was very much like when my parents left me in Florence, I thought, whoa, I think I made a big mistake. I don't know if I can do this. I don't know if I can do this. But, like the research shows, like resilience is not the absence of trouble or pushing or challenge. It's really how you've resourced yourself, been scrappy, found solutions, found support, found help along the way, and came out on top, or not even on top, but through it,
Yeah. Which in its own way can be on top, just getting through something.
Hmm.
But how do you think that has played into, we've talked in previous episodes about how you ended up in Chicago, and it was
Hmm.
like sort of that reconciliation of everything that led up to that moment in your
Hmm.
life, resolved, unresolved, conscious, unconscious. And then you found yourself in that space of postpartum, trying to navigate through that. How do you feel like your background, whether it's just, the ideals and core values that you have, or those experiences of traveling and being a little bit more, I would say, like comfortable in like the gypsy lifestyle,
Hmm.
how did that play into maybe how you came into this work or how you arrive at this work with different clients and from different
Mm.
perspectives?
Well, I think it definitely, breeds an environment of empathy and understanding and compassion and curiosity, which makes you automatically just very open to working with people, no matter what the
Mhm.
outlet is. So I think just in general, those environments and my energy makeup really allowed me to use those gifts to help others. But I think living in Chicago, newly married, my husband's attention being pulled in various really demanding ways. A very demanding job, a part time business program, working nights, weekends. We didn't have family in the city. We did have family in the suburbs, but suburbs in Chicago is
Yeah.
still an hour and a half away. So, and we had friends, but we got pregnant really quickly there with our first, and our friends were not having children yet. So it felt very alone, which usually, like, I love being alone and I am independent. However, that really destabilized my sense of grounding and my sense of who I was, what I was doing, if I could
Mhm.
trust myself. I didn't feel like I had a safety net.
Yeah. And
That
it's a huge identity shift,
huge
like
identity shift.
becoming a mother, and there's the like societal programming that we've kind of adopted in terms of, or absorbed at a minimum,
Hmm.
in terms of what that means. And then there's the like grief side of it
Hmm.
also, with like what you have to give up to make space for that.
And nobody prepares you for that. People will say, "Oh, your life is going to change." And when I heard that, I interpreted that as my schedule's going to change,
Yeah.
not like my bones and soul are going to
Yeah.
change. Um, and with baby showers, it's wonderful that you get all these like baby gifts, but it's really lacking, at least in my cultural upbringing. Um, a sense of this is a death and a rebirth.
Yep.
This is a leaving of the old to embrace the new. These are the resources you're going to need on that transformation journey. That was not in any of the things I was doing pregnant or as a new mom at all. And so that was really hard. And actually, speaking of the Sagittarius, I read from an astrologer that specializes in motherhood that Sag moms have a really hard time with
Interesting.
losing the independence
I
of
could see that.
what was to then embrace something new that you don't feel good at. Who wants to do stuff that you feel like you're terrible at and you have to show up every day and the stakes are high because you have this little one that you are totally in charge of and you literally do think, who thought this was a good idea?
Well,
Who thought giving me this newborn baby to go home is a good idea?
and it feels very high stakes even in
Very
those
high
moments. And
stakes.
you
Yeah.
know that like 10 years from then, whether you did a great job or you really did not knock it out of the park, they're going to have like a feedback loop to tell you about it.
And they do. Yeah. Let me tell you now, as a mom of a 9, an 8, and 6-year-old, they give feedback.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think it wasn't even the fact of I thought I was good at new terrain, right? Like
Yeah.
my whole life, I felt very, not totally comfortable where you don't feel those like butterflies in your stomach, but I would feel like I could handle new experience, new terrain, being the only one to maybe do something or say something or be some way. But that experience really knocked that off of the kilter a
Well, it
lot.
also can take it can take a level of confidence. I'm going to readjust here, but it knocks your confidence when you are on a path, even if you've like gone through new experiences before and you've built resilience in them. Typically when you're a child, if you're in a secure environment, if you have, good enough parenting, if you have enough security, you can take on a new experience with, to your point, that safety net and like a different sort of like emotional confidence of like, oh yeah, I don't have to do this. This isn't survival. You're given another human that you need to keep alive. Like it's survival in a different way, no matter how resourced you are.
Well, and survival for this little one, but also survival for me in this new identity. Like I was a newborn mother. I was just a newborn mother. Who's going to take care of me?
Yeah.
And I felt like nobody. And that was, not necessarily true either, right? Like, there were some lifelines, there were some support nets. Like there was a postpartum group at the hospital that I gave birth with, and I'm still friends with those girls because we were like in it. And so that, gave me some, secure attachment for my new motherhood self. And my own mom would come and help. And, but it really felt very destabilizing, very lonely, very much like, I don't know who this is. I don't know what this is. I don't know who this is. And I would outsource my power too. I would have this app. I laugh about this, but I just want to wrap myself in that, sitting in that gold glider in my kid's room and like timing the breastfeeding on the left side for 15 minutes because somebody somewhere told me that that's what you should do. And then breastfeeding for the next 15 minutes. And then he would still be cranky. And I'm like, oh my God, I can't even do this. Like what's happening? That is etched into my mind of like, God bless, you're like outsourcing your own intuition and like feedback from him and you didn't allow yourself, and I couldn't back then either, but I didn't allow myself to feel my body and to respond to him and to even be open and free enough to like see his cues and know his cues and know mine, because I was so destabilized. And there's another one too where, I still feel like I need to do work on this. Actually, this one, I took my newborn to preschool and I had colostrum in the milk, but I didn't even know what that was. I just knew it was more yellow than like other milk. And the adults that were in charge of his class like didn't know what it was either. And they were like, there's something wrong with your milk. And like was shaming me about my milk. And I'm telling you how far I took that deep down into my soul of like, there's something wrong with me not providing nourishment for this kid. And I'm embarrassed and I'm shamed
Yeah.
and I don't even know what I'm doing and I don't know how to fix it and there's no path forward and I'm just a ball of shame. And I cried the entire way home, the entire time I was there. And I'm like, God bless. My story and their story created this environment of just like utter, it felt like trauma. And you can
Yeah.
tell me if it might have been or not. I don't
No,
know,
it
but it feels that
absolutely is.
significant.
It's like an event and you weren't even,
I
yeah,
was
you're
so
interpreting
raw.
the event and you're like like shame bound with it, but like
Yes.
that's an actual thing that happened. You didn't
Yeah.
make that up in your head and
No. And they
it
threw it away. They
oh, okay.
threw my colostrum away. Now people are paying like what?
I know I
Fucking
pay
$50 for
$140 a month.
armra for
Yeah.
colostrum. I'm
I
like,
pay a
yeah,
hefty sum for
yeah.
somebody
For
else's
somebody, yeah, for some cow's
colostrum.
colostrum.
Exactly.
Yeah, so that I took it so far in. I took it so far in and I just
Well, you're building a new identity that you're
yes.
already uncertain about, that you're not prepared for, that there's no, I mean, there are books, certainly, there are people,
Oh, and
but
I
like,
read them. I read all
it's
those
not,
books.
there's a real big difference in any work that we're doing with
Mhm.
anything, like a difference between reading words to
Mhm.
intellectually understand and having the experience that is driving those words, and you're having like a physiological and embodied understanding. Like
Mhm.
my question in my head when you were telling that story was, were any of those women at the preschool a mother? Because
Right.
nine
I
times out of
don't think they
10,
were.
that there would be like a mother who would have maybe gone through the same thing or had a
Mhm.
girlfriend who went through the same thing and would have pulled you aside and been like, hey, like this
It's
is totally fine.
yeah.
This is totally
It's actually
normal.
really beautiful. It's
Yeah.
actually the most nutrient dense
This
milk
is
that you
great.
have
We're not going to
provided.
shame the other moms because
Right.
they don't have this. It's like that usually you get that from somebody who has known the same experience, and it's
Mhm.
not going to be, and I'm not trying to diss on anybody who has like a PhD or in academia, but um, I had this conversation with a friend a couple years ago, which I haven't thought about in a really long time, but it was a dialogue about the medical industry, but more so like, would I take the advice of a doctor who didn't have the lived experience that I had or that someone else had? And we
Mhm.
happened to be talking about this was in the height of the like Jada Pinkett Smith, that
Mm.
whole the slap heard around the world, and my initial stance on that was like, hey, like white friends of mine, like that is not, this is not our space to comment.
Mhm.
There's like a lot of cultural elements in here, and like it's like with any situation, if it's not your situation, you didn't live through it, you don't know the details behind it, you see something publicly, yes, you're going to assign some sort of judgment to it, you're going to assign meaning to it, but like if you don't actually know what's going on, maybe like sit out from giving your
Right. It's
opinion.
the active listening part of the participation that is lacking. Like
Yeah.
Lucretia spoke to at a Behind the Throne podcast that I did a few weeks
Mhm.
ago. And in like as a white person in an anti-racism journey, like a lot of it really is active listening and receiving and doing own inner work instead of maybe providing comments and feedback and your own perspective on it if it's
Yeah.
not fully reasoned yet, fully hashed out yet, fully grounded yet. So
Yeah.
well, and speaking to that, like my cultural background is Scandinavian. And I think part of my independence and stuff probably comes
Yeah.
from that line. We have a lot of Norwegian and Swedish and Dane. And I think that kind of foundation of that cultural experience really plays a lot into my family, but also within my own like
Yeah.
genes. I feel that deeply and I resonate with that culture very deeply. So my dad's mom's mom, so my great grandmother,
Mhm.
she was left on a front stoop in
Yeah.
Iowa on the way out west. And I think that abandonment and that
Yeah.
disconnection of that line of culture has played into a lot of the dynamics that have moved forward from then. If we want to speak to generational trauma,
Yeah, I mean,
epigenetics,
it's
that
like
kind of
Gabor
influence.
Mate's entire story of being
Yeah.
abandoned as a baby and what kind of, like the epigenetic and DNA sort of implications of anything that's like family line past,
Hmm.
whether you remember it or not, it is embodied. Your
Right.
trauma becomes embodied.
Yeah.
It's not an option. It's
Yeah.
just, kind of how
Yeah.
it goes.
Well, and then
So,
I see memes, obviously, like we're in the spiritual space, we're in the a little bit woo woo space or whatever. And I've seen memes of like, thanks a lot, God, for being your soldier that's going to like rewire the generational trauma. And I just giggle because I'm like, I wonder if that's part of my purpose here is to heal and redirect some of that abandonment wound that,
yeah.
probably was going on even before that experience for my great grandmother. But
Yeah.
that is a more
Well, I think
recent
about that
experience
a
of that.
lot because it's, I'm definitely like a cycle breaker. I'm like a little bit of, I wouldn't say like an oddball necessarily, because it's not that I don't feel loved and accepted and belong. Like I feel belonging in my family of origin and of choice, I would say, because we've trimmed that tree a little
Yeah.
bit.
But you present maybe differently than the people you grew up with and around and
Yeah.
for generations.
And I come with this different perspective. And it was the same thing where like there's the one side of it when you, especially when you're like getting into the work and you're, recognizing what it takes to be a cycle breaker and you're recognizing kind of the responsibility of this work, especially if you're going to be a practitioner or healer for others. And then there's the like very human practical side that I got to where it's like, oh, but is this pain better or worse for me than the pain of remaining and continuing that cycle? And it's
Mm,
like, oh no, carrying that with me for the rest of my life and being a part of that pack would be way more painful to me and my
mhm.
soul
So,
than
yeah.
breaking out of this.
Yeah. It's like you have to determine what weight you're
Yeah.
willing to carry,
Yeah.
honestly.
So, I mean, it probably landed with you, but it landed in your consciousness
Mhm.
more than it's like a true responsibility that you have to
Right.
have. You've leaned into it.
I've leaned into it a little bit. You're welcome, everyone.
you're, you're on that path.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it was funny too. I have a friend that's a psychic, and I've gone to her a few times. And one time she said, like, all the ancestors were there, like, clapping. And I was like, thanks.
Yeah.
Thanks. I'm working hard down here for us guys.
Yeah.
Like, well, what do you think, Val, are significant contributing factors as far as your like upbringing, your cultural experience in various levels of culture?
It's so deep. I mean, I started pretty young feeling curious about that.
Yeah.
So I grew up outside of Philly. My mom's family was pretty close in the sort of Pennsylvania area. And then my dad is from New York, just like a little bit north of the city. And they had very different family dynamics, very different lives. And, both were not wealthy by any means, but like had enough by what we would call like were always housed, always had
Hmm.
food, all of those things, had education. That was sort of an expectation. My mom's side of the family, we spent so much more time with, and that was the one that had way more generational trauma. It was like female dominated. There was a ton of shaming, control. I mean, and we would hear the stories as kids. And I also had, I think on that side, I don't know the exact number, we maybe had 8 or 12 cousins, and like 9 of them were girls. And we were
Mm.
all within like, most were within several years of each other. So it was just a really different perspective because that sort of generational trauma was like very apparent. And I've been thinking about it a lot recently because we have a couple people that like had to kind of exit the system.
Hmm.
But it's just I have like a curiosity of like, if they hadn't been handed that same shame script, like it was shame, control, what everybody else thinks, externalities. And the deeper I get into like the trauma world, the more apparent it is that it's like further repressing emotion, further
Hmm.
repressing authenticity, further preventing healing, which means it was stronger for more generations
Hmm.
because to break out of that cycle, and that is everybody has experienced those same stories. And, my aunts, um, I had so many aunts, but there were primarily like my great aunts, there were like 6 of them.
Mm.
So it's like a very strong vibe. And when you see each other all the time, they were the ones that were like on the phone with each other constantly. Every time I came home from school, I mean, my mom was mostly on the phone and she was dealing with her own my mom had a lot of unresolved trauma and a lot of unresolved identity stuff that was probably not positioning her to be like a present parent.
Hmm.
And we didn't have the resourcing then that we have now. So, like, for me, that was a huge driver. And why I was like, yeah, I'm really not interested in having kids
Hmm.
until I feel like I am on the other side of my own healing and can show up in the way that I want.
Hmm.
And I don't think, and I think my mom would say that she did not show up in the way that she wanted. And so that created like another layer of things that she
Hmm.
had to work through. And it put my brother and I on our own paths where it's like, it's not judgmental, but it's just very matter of fact of like, yeah, that wasn't our experience.
Right.
This is who we are. We're pretty good now. I mean, I think we've worked
Yeah.
through a lot of things. Where I was really going with that is, I would come home from school and my mom was on the phone. I don't remember a time that
Yeah.
my mom wasn't on the phone or that she was present, but it was all the aunts talk to each other every day.
Okay.
So they're following this, you can't get out of that cycle every day when you're absorbing what's going on and the like, microaggressions and passive aggressiveness. And there was this element all the time of like who wasn't talking to whom at that particular moment and for why. And it wasn't until recently that I looked back and was like, oh, wow, that's like the first huge glaring red flag that there's a family systems problem
Mm.
because we shouldn't be operating that way. And this also, it was this like cultural mentality of like, if this person does me wrong, we all have to hate them. We all have to shame
Mm.
them. They need to be othered until the enemy of my enemy becomes my friend. And then they come back in and we're shifting. But it's all within this same dysfunctional system.
Yeah.
And so my closest girl cousins and I were all mostly within like a year and a half of each other.
Oh,
So
wow.
we're coming up at the same time. We're in some of the same social circles. We're going to some of the same schools. And the prior generations had been given the script of like perfection and
Hmm.
competitiveness and comparison, and everything was just, what will people think?
Right.
And there was just something in me that really rejected that pretty early.
Hmm.
And I couldn't pinpoint it. And for me, it was just like, oh, I'm different, or I'm different. I'm never going to like kind of ladder up to this. I learned really early how to like sort of like deflect compliments because you don't want to bring that attention because somebody's going to resent it or somebody's going to feel a certain way about it. And so we really didn't get a blueprint for like how to support each other. We
Hmm.
just kind of like learned organically. And quite frankly, I think learned through traumatic experiences or shared experience. We just didn't, it was just a really different environment. I think a lot of women experience that
Hmm.
even when you're like starting to wake up in your consciousness and you start to think back. And I did a ton of work when I started my like real intense trauma healing, where it was like the younger self sort
Hmm.
of. I did a program where it was more like Ashmita, so that's like more in the like yogic world, and you do a lot of that like inner child healing. And when you go through some of those memories and you look at them again from a different perspective, you're like, oh, how did I not realize that that was making me sick?
Right.
And so, like, we were talking earlier about, just not recognizing when you take on trauma, it is embodied. It is this like physiological thing. And when you don't know how to express it out, you don't know how to process it, you also often like, I did not know until I really got deep into this work that like it was physiological.
Hmm.
I'm thinking it's a mental health because, you receive words towards you, you think them in your head, you're spinning around kind of these thoughts and feelings, but it's actually an emotion. And the emotion is sort of like feelings paired with like
Hmm.
physiological absorption of whatever the trauma is, whatever the thing is that is impacting you. And
Hmm.
I remember feeling some of these feelings and being very in tune with that. And, when I was a younger child, I was extremely intuitive, would on occasion like have conversations with family members who had passed, some of which I had never met. So I
Hmm.
think for my parents, that was a bit of a very clear sign that something was like a little bit different, but
hmm
my mom had experience with that when she was younger as
I
well.
was
So
about
it
to say, just
wasn't,
because you're confident enough and childlike enough to speak it out loud because it feels so innate in you.
yeah,
But there are other people that were probably having that experience that didn't feel the same confidence to share it, maybe.
yeah.
Yeah.
And so, well, and also like it wasn't suppressed. It was sort of
hmm
like, oh, okay. I mean, that's always a jarring thing.
Right.
I believe very much. And if you told me right now that you were talking to like one of my past ancestors, I'd be like, oh, okay. Like it's always a jarring moment. But from that to, throughout my life, especially at like real times of trouble, I have had visitation
hmm
dreams. I was really in line with intuition. One of my aunts would tell you she took me one time to see Sesame Street live, and there's a whole bunch of chaos, as there is during the holiday season when you're taking toddlers to a theater event.
hmm
And I was like making comments in the car, and we parked the car. And I was like, I really hope there isn't like a car fire. And she was like, why are you like this? And then I guess we went in, we came back out, we got in the car, and we got stuck on the highway because there was a car fire. And she turned around and looked at me and was like,
Yeah.
you need to be more specific. And so like it wasn't, I didn't grow up in a world where like that was like shunned or I wasn't
Right.
allowed to express myself. But like over time and you grow out of it, like I didn't have that for years. It wasn't like
Well,
a
and the world doesn't
constant.
really enable you to share that. I mean,
Exactly.
collectively, that's seen as very fringe, very weird, especially in a white, patriarchal, Christian
Yep.
dominating religious conversation that's very much, countercultural, we'll say.
Yeah.
Um,
I think
I,
that is a
I think
podcast
that's
for
like a
sure.
series of podcasts, honestly, because we could take the whole intuition, spiritual gifts route in so many different ways that I think would unlock and give permission to a lot of people
Yeah.
to even just consider exploring that area of themselves, or at least, identifying with those moments in their life.
Also, I think, when you aren't delivered the script, which we're not from society, that like that's normal or acceptable or something to not be afraid of. Because there's most of what we do is like this fear-based kind of approach to,
Mhm.
to living. I'm certain that there's a lot of people, because it's not, I think there's this idea, and we talk about this a lot, and this is a lot of why we try to like hit more of a practical road in our conversations. There's language that's gotten assigned to these types of experiences, and that language feels like unattainable or different or weird or like
Mhm.
ripe for judgment. Whereas most humans, when you are in moments of like clarity or grounding, or I would say often like deep, deep emotional need,
Mhm.
when you're, whether you're on the high end of the emotion or the low end of the emotion, you are deeply in emotion.
Mhm.
And it creates a more, I think, like perceptibility for some of these experiences to sort of like help you get to where you need to be. And it doesn't mean that you're going to see like a ghost as it's portrayed, perhaps in
Mhm.
the media, come to you. Sometimes it's just like little bits of intuition.
Mhm.
And can I prove every day that I'm like, oh, my grandmother's telling me this? Is it that I'm seeing her and she's delivering me words? It's like, no, but like I'm like deep in my bones and I'm
You can
deeply
feel,
embodied
yeah.
and I can feel the like love and connection to that person. And I am also reaching out through love and connection for guidance,
Mhm.
whether I'm fully conscious of it or not. And so I think it's this, I find it interesting when folks want to like shut it down and there's like an immediate fear. And it's like, okay, let's imagine that the intuition and the thoughts and the feelings you're getting connected to, whether it's a voice in your head, a voice from a guide, a voice from anywhere, like what's wrong with exploring that with curiosity?
Mhm.
And, in trauma work, one of the like major tenets you have to have, both I think in your own healing, but as a practitioner, it's like, yes, you need to have courage because you have to be embodied and you have to create a safe space and find your own tools to regulate, or you shouldn't be working with somebody who needs co-regulation.
Mhm.
But you also need to be curious because things are not black and white. It's there's like epigenetics and there's generational trauma and all of these other things. And then we can kind of look at identities, which are intersectional and extremely complicated. And then there's cultural aspects. And then there's the lived experience with all of those lenses. There's no one right answer to anything.
No.
Like you and I could have experienced the same type of trauma, but the context around it is completely different.
And the impact would be so different. And then the way that presents in our lives and influences our perspective is so different.
And it prevents us from healing. So oftentimes people will not go into trauma healing or trauma therapy or grief or whatever it is, or, come and work with you in human design or come and work with me because it feels like admitting to something that is so ripe for judgment and really vulnerable and is stigmatized and has a label. Whereas like, take all of the labels away and just like talk about what is happening and think about what is happening. And can you bring a curiosity to it, knowing that you don't have to accept anything as 100% truth.
Well, and I think what's really supportive when you're doing that and, speaking to the intuition conversation too is, what I'm about to say, human design chart, because it can bring some structure to that conversation and some context to maybe what they've gone through to reassure them that it's not their fault. Here's why it might be presenting this way. Here's why it might be presenting that way. It can feel way more self-compassionate when you can depersonalize some of it. Obviously, that's not going to fix your trauma, but it gives you a level of, oh, that is actually not part of my design, but yet I'm showing up like this. So there has to be another influence there. And the human design chart also describes intuition, and it describes how you might receive your intuition, how I might receive mine. And so I think that would be such a
It's the same curiosity though, right? Because I think the major barrier for folks with human design is the input, where it's like, oh no, that's like super woo-woo. You can't know anything about me based off of just like that small amount of information. And so it's like curiosity has to come into the program at some point, or the barrier of entry for anything that is going to provide like real healing becomes too high. I think I was lucky and fortunate to grow up where, my upbringing wasn't 100% perfect and I didn't feel emotionally resourced most of the time. And it was, I learned how to kind of be independent and be a little bit more of an adult. And I have that in my personality and I have that in my human design, but also in the dynamics of our home. My dad was pretty busy and my mom was kind of like offline a lot of the time and wasn't somebody that I very infrequently viewed her as more capable than I was myself, even as a child, which is her greatest fear, but also was perpetuated by it probably being her greatest fear. And it created a cycle of stagnation. And I have obviously a different chart and obviously I'm a different person and had my dad's side where he's like more hyper independent. And so all of those like factors combined, like I could sit and make up stories about victimization or sit and make up stories about things being worse than they were. But at the end of the day, I was white, upper middle class, privileged, safe, educated, housed, fed. Like all of those things were met in a way that allowed me to experience and process through trauma. Obviously, we've talked about like not an easy path.
Right.
But I was enabled to have that curiosity about like kind of like higher self and things that were not just like delivered on the menu of society, so that when I did come back to this place and I was ready for the work and I was able to find that curiosity and I was able to lean into it without judgment. And like my first stops were like women's trauma groups through yoga, grief healing, and my Reiki practitioner and teacher. Ultimately, she became my teacher, but that's not like an accessible path if you're going to carry and cloak in shame about the concepts. For me, I cloaked in shame more when it came to my inability to remove myself from situations or people that I knew were unhealthy for me. It wasn't about like, I would have, if you told me that I could solve that by like living on Mars and like, only eating nuts and seeds, I probably would have done it in that moment just to
Mm-hmm.
get to the other side. But I would say, so that was sort of where I came from, which was a really interesting foundation of how I arrived in this work because it felt very accessible to me. It felt very intuitively, I just knew that it was a space where I could grow in. And I don't listen to everything, nor, I mean, like anything. I don't believe in any full perspective of anything.
Yeah.
I really do like try different things on. Some things work for me, some things don't. It's just like
Well,
nobody's
discernment's such
trauma is the
a
same.
right.
Nobody's healing journey is going to be the same. I had had enough exposure in a non-judgmental way to this type of healing and this type of work. And I'd also been in like more clinical therapy for so long that I knew that that wasn't enough for me.
Yeah.
I appreciated the resourcing in terms of it was like the first barrier of like someone to talk to. Like I loved my therapist and I appreciated it, but I had been in therapy for 20 years and like could repeat all the language
Mm-hmm.
and I was never getting the resourcing I need to understand the embodiment aspect. It was very headspacey.
Right, which is there's a place for that, but it's not the complete picture of it. So a lot of people come to me in my work after they have
Yeah.
exhausted therapy or have not found a good fit and have realized the benefits of this. Like this work does not replace therapy because it is a nice component to the
Yeah.
mind, body, spirit, energy connection because there is a lot of benefit and obviously there's a whole there's a whole market for that is to talk through it and revisit things and
Yeah.
rewire that conscious patterning. But the beauty of using both, I'm such a holistic natured
Yeah.
person that using both, mainstream talk therapy and pair that with the breath work, the yoga, the
Yeah.
moving, the energetic based systems just really
Yeah.
help.
It's also important to find. So I was really lucky, especially like when I grounded back here in Charlotte, and I was starting this work. And so I was doing both just separately. And
Mhm.
finally, I just said to my therapist, I was like, hey, I need to talk through some things because I've been processing it this way. I'm finding this really effective and was prepared for her to be like, yeah, I can't work with you anymore. And instead she was like, okay, so you want to work in the metaphysical? Let's do it. And I was
Yeah.
like, great.
Oh, so I just
You're
had to like flip that switch
totally
on. Okay.
meeting me. And I was like, and then I realized, and the more I learned about like her restrictions, it's like, oh yeah, you can't suggest this to me.
Right.
You can't introduce this to me. But where I ended up going with the session series was this is such an important component. And like, I'm going to go do all of my like academic stuff I need to do to really understand trauma and the brain and how it shows up in the body. And so I actually like did embodiment coaching first. And then, grief and how that's showing up. Obviously, you can't study trauma without grief. That would be just so incomplete.
Mm-hmm.
And then I became an energy healer. And the more it was just like, okay, circling the wagons of where I needed to be. But where I landed this business and the whole reason for it wasn't because I was looking to have another business or this felt like something that I was going to leave my job for. It was both to continue my personal healing,
Mm-hmm.
to show up. And I've worked with a lot of intuitives and a lot of different coaches who were like, okay, or even Kiki, my teacher for Reiki, she was like, okay, you understand, like, this is your responsibility, like, this is your path, right? So it came pretty intuitively to me. And what I wanted to do is bridge that gap between traditional psychotherapies and embodiment.
Mm-hmm.
And I had owned gyms for probably a decade, a bunch of different franchises, like,
Which again, so much good stuff happens in the gym, but it's
but
not the
so
complete
much
picture.
harmful stuff happens in the
Yes.
gym. And so I was unlearning all of those sort of like wellness myths.
Mhm.
And like, it's just the same way. I think we were talking last time about just culture of achievement that burns us out and creates something.
Well, no industry is immune from white, patriarchal,
There we are.
capitalistic influences. I mean, we are all swimming in that, no matter if it even starts off as a really nice
Yeah.
intention of having a yoga gym can also turn into something way different.
Well, scalable franchising is
Right.
not for health or wellness.
No.
Scalable franchising in any business is going to deteriorate service and deteriorate like the personal sort of connectivity. And then when you layer in, it was like, I own those gyms at the height of like Whole30 and paleo and this like absolute restrictive, exclusionary sort of thought process about eating. I mean, you look at any part of it and any part of society at that time in terms of, yes, and this is like a white dominant thing. It was just like trauma re-embodied and trauma recycled. And we were calling it health and we were calling it like the best life or what have you. I had never been sicker.
Mm-hmm.
I am so much healthier now. And like, I refuse to work out the way that I used to work out before. I don't eat that way. It's like I was able to ground myself. So it's like I am just pretty intuitive in my life. If today what my body wants is to take a walk, it's going to take a walk. I am not going to force myself to do some sort of HIIT workout
Right.
that my body is too tired for, that's going to break me down further, that I'm going to think because I'm getting all these chemicals in my brain, I'm going to think immediately following, oh God, I'm so glad I did that.
Mm-hmm.
But like, it allowed me to repress a little bit more. It allowed me to avoid even more. It allowed me to play into that same sort of like perfection culture of like how my body looks is more important than how my body feels. What people perceive is more important than like what truly is going on inside. And I wasn't educated enough to understand at that time that what is going on in the body in terms of emotional repression is a thing that will trigger non-genetic cancers and
Mm-hmm.
genetic cancers.
Mm-hmm.
It will trigger autoimmune diseases. It will trigger all sorts of chronic illness. And because you're running on a system that is already inflamed and it's now eating away at the healthy parts of your body
Mm-hmm.
or your internal systems. And so all of this to say, you know, I landed kind of the last business sold in, I think it was August of 2020, which also like took me nearly to death's door to like finish while I was starting all this, like, or I was in the really intense trauma healing. They like all just sort of like the things burned away naturally that needed to burn away. And the things that were like missing just found me and
Mm-hmm.
welcomed in at the right times. And so to transition a little bit to like meet these things in the middle, I started the session series. I was working with individual clients and I was doing, I had done a couple of group programs that were geared more towards like foundational grief awareness, foundational trauma healing, a little bit of embodiment, and some like detoxing, which was not this wasn't about like restriction. It was about like kind of learning how to rebalance gut health so that you have the ability to eat intuitively and to move intuitively. Because when your gut is out of whack, the gut brain axis for any nerds in the room, you will continue to have those like cravings and those impulses to reach for things that it's not about good food, bad food. It's like what food makes you feel nourished and what food do you know makes you feel sick or alcohol or, you know, what have you. And it doesn't impact everybody the same way. So I did all of that and then got to this point of like kind of fatigue and loneliness in it because there's a lot that goes into this work and there's requirements like for every credential to stay up to date on what's going on, to learn like the new whatever direction we're going in, or if there's new research that comes in, to absorb that, factor that into your practice. But I had nobody to talk to. And I was trying to, at that time, talk to people that were in my network who weren't doing the work that I'm like, you seem smart. I'm going to tell you all these things. Realizing that wasn't actually progressing me. It was holding me back and it was holding me in patterns because I'm now intaking unhealed wounds and unhealed advice while I'm trying to like really ground in healing. And all it was doing was keeping me stuck in a couple loops that I needed to break. And one day I was looking for a path to podcasting because I'm like, this seems like the best approach to be like one to many and many to one. Like, how do I scale this in a way? I'm not really driven by the financial aspect. It's like about resourcing and support. And I had been in so many situations and moments where I knew or I did not know where to go for help or who I could reach out to that could understand or would at least not meet me with judgment and was healed enough to not try and convince me or give me their unhealed advice coming from their wounds. And so I'm like searching for this place in this community, and I was like trying out all these different things. And then Lauren Woodrick, who was doing these grab life by the goals, New Year's sort of retreats, events. I think it was a summit. She was looking for sponsors, and I was just sitting there, and it was probably like this exact time a year ago.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, yeah, whatever. I'm going to sponsor this because I just feel like I need to go to it. And I've been in this like more global community. I want to really entrench myself in my local community and see if I can get like a little bit more in-person connection, a little bit more of a network that I could like sit with at coffee and not constantly be on Zoom or, I sourced a lot of clients through Heal Me, which is a great platform and I'm glad it exists, but it was very impersonal. And also they were paying clients. So it wasn't the same thing as finding my own resourcing community. And ended up there. I had heard about your work through Angie and through Kate. And then I'm pretty sure when we sat down, Lauren was like, also like, you really need to meet Rachel when we were talking about this like event partnership. And I showed up with just the intention of like, all right, I'm going to see what this is. And at one point, Lauren was like, hey, like, do you want to go up for 5 minutes and just talk about what your business is? We'll give you this, like this platform to talk about it. And I remember very little about it. I remember walking up and I just remember being like, I'm going to sit down because that feels really aligned to me. And then sat on the stage instead of standing and doing my like quick pitch the way that I was probably supposed to. And talked a little bit about my story. And, I had these relationship patterns that were not working for me. And then I got into a trauma bond with a narcissist and somebody who was just like a very unsafe, very selfish, but also very much operating from their lowest self and got caught in that cycle and had spent a long time like watching my life from the outside. And so talked a little bit about that, I think, and then landed back and like, mostly like, this is my intention with this business. I have no agenda. Like, it's just, here we are. And you then, either before or after, I can't remember, led a Reiki meditation. I have no idea what you said, but I remember having tears, which is how I know for me that like the connection is working and the energy is cycling, because I've had people do like meditation and Reiki where I'm like, I feel nothing. I don't like, you're not radiating anything, or they were really dysregulated. And I'm like, I'm just getting bad energy.
Yeah.
And like a lot of folks that are like bypassing, they want to be a part of it and it seems cool, but they're not willing to do the work to actually deliver on it. And so for me, it was like hugely credible that I was like, okay, I am now weeping and I have this like sense of calm, and I had to leave early. And I got home and was like, I got to send this random chick a message, even though she has no idea who I am. And I did not say hello at this summit.
Well, that was so funny because I had started working with Lauren through the group coaching experience that she had. And because I was transitioning my business, Crafting Good, from a subscription box company with kindness crafts and stuff and kindness in the community and world and family. And then it mimicked my own journey because I realized there was no self-compassion, self-kindness. And here I had almost 20 years of speech therapy experience of relational, impact with people that I was not utilizing in my business. So I had met Lauren when I just started offering coaching, and I had also, done the Institute of Integrative Nutrition certification in 2012. That was just dormant. I used it for me and trying to, reckon with my own wellness and health and stuff. And, but I also had that in my back pocket that was just kind of laying dormant. And I thought, oh, these are gifts and skills that I've created that I'm not utilizing through this channel. So how can I be relational with these tools? So I needed business support around that because it was such a different business model. And I already had no clue what I was doing as a subscription box company owner. So I was like, okay, I need community. I need entrepreneurial support. I need skills. I need network. I need clients. I just, and I found that there and it was so wonderful. And then Lauren had done the summit, I think the year before, and I had done a Reiki meditation and had met beautiful clients like Kate and Angie and so many other people, just beautiful people. And it really, that conference ignited my business to where I am enabled to even do this podcast with you.
Yeah.
So that point in time was really significant and it felt very magical. And so when she was having it again last year, I thought, oh my gosh, of course, please let me do the Reiki meditation. I just loved it so much. And I didn't know how I would be able to present with that group of many of people. Like at that point, I had only hosted meditations for 10 to 20 people, not 100, 150 people on a stage, of people that, yes, probably had some mystical, magical elements to them, but were not there for the Reiki meditation.
Yeah.
So, but I definitely
I was there for it.
Yeah. Well, I definitely do feel that I am just a channel of the work. And so it is very much easy for me to set my ego aside. And so what I do before every Reiki meditation, whether it's you and me or for 150 people or more, I say a blessing over myself of I call all of my spirit squad in. I'm like, help me put my ego aside and let my true self shine for my highest and best, but for the highest and best of the whole group. And then I can show up on stage not nervous. I mean, I was nervous. I definitely had some, mixed energy going on, but that grounding blessing allows me enough space to channel whatever needs to come through and touch the lives of everyone there because I've already called their spirit squad in too. And we're all having this really intimate experience in a large venue. And so I got that feedback from you and I thought, oh, thank God. Thank you. Because I really do trust that blessing that even though my ego is nervous and I'm running that energy, I am also just as much or more my highest self and my larger part of me that also showed up and wants to touch the lives of people. So I appreciated that perspective from you. But what was interesting last year was as soon as you got, and I didn't even know you were sponsoring at that point because I was just flittering about, talking to friends, whatever. And I hadn't made it to everybody's table. And so when you got on the stage, your presence even just oh, I want to hear what she has to say. Your branding too really caught my attention. And when you decided to sit down on stage, I thought, okay, authenticity. Okay, true self. Okay, get your needs met, Winston. And I did. I responded to you immediately, and I honestly don't remember what you said. I remember how you said it, and I remember thinking, oh my God, everything she says is resonating with me. All of her goals that she's expressing through session series are my same goals for this business. And so I was like, I have to meet her. And then I went over there and you had gone already. And I was like, oh no, I missed Val. And so then immediately I checked your Instagram and I followed you. And so I was like, well, at least I'll start following Val. And we have this communication open now or whatever. And I think when I came back to it at the end of the day or whatever, you had messaged me like, hey, do you want to grab coffee? And I was like, yes. Oh my gosh, this is amazing.
Well, also I meet a million people for coffee.
Right.
I do coffee a lot. It's one of my favorite, food-ish. But there's a lot of unknowns when you're meeting a new person.
Yeah.
Both in this world where, I try to stay closer to the middle because my whole point is I want to make this work and this resourcing as accessible. And I see the barrier of entry is actually language, not concept. And so, sometimes I just don't connect with or relate to people who, I think it's probably identify some spiritual bypass because my really authentic healers and practitioners, they can use whatever words they want. And I'm like, I'm going to follow your energy down.
It's the vibes. It's not the concrete.
But then there's the other side of, I think, what we kind of danced around, but I have a very strong moral and ethical perspective and I have very strong core values. And I would say my core value in this work is humanity and I recognize that I show up as an affluent white woman in suburban America that's pretty much been protected. I mean, granted, I have not had it easy the whole time, but those were situational things. It wasn't privilege. I've gotten in and out of those situations with a heavy dose of privilege every single time. and my ability to resource and pay for all these things that I needed to create this healing for myself, which hopefully it's been very clear. Like I came out this for myself first
Yeah.
of like, I have this need and I was able to spend that money and it did not um, create any financial instability for me. And so where I never know with other people is, are you coming from that same level of like, I recognize that marginalized and underrepresented groups don't have access to this and they deserve it, and they deserve it from me for free
Mhm.
or at whatever cost is like necessary. But this is not, for me, it's not like a markup situation. I will charge folks who are resourced full price for my time, my energy, what I've invested into it, all of that. But like the core mission I had was like, how does this message and how do these resources get to the people who truly need them?
Well, especially since a lot of these somatic tools are based in indigenous cultures,
Mm-hmm.
and then we've like colonized them. So then it's part of that too. It's like,
Yeah.
let me also help return these belongings to you. Like, I
Yeah.
don't even know. But it was interesting when you said that about how, your vision for the nonprofit and giving people access. I had had a recent experience where my very, very close aunt was in hospice, and I was flying to Kansas City a lot at that same time last year, and had to miss one of my acupuncture workshops that I was like dying to
Yeah,
go
I remember
to.
that.
Yeah. And so I was like, she had messaged me, would you like a refund or would you like to sponsor this spot for someone? And a huge light went off, and I
Yeah.
thought, oh, I would love to sponsor a
Yeah.
spot for someone. So then my wheels were turning and my creative juices were flowing. I was like, oh my God, I want this to be a nonprofit. I want to give people money, like hand them money to go to a workshop and learn these tools. I want to provide
Yeah.
this for people if they want to be receiving Reiki or getting Reiki certification or doing
Yeah.
human design charts or whatever. And I was just on fire. So when you told me, everything was so kismet, the way
Yeah.
we just basically mimicked each other. When you were like, oh, this is my vision for this nonprofit. And I thought, oh my gosh, that is nuts, because I literally just started having that like epiphany around how I wanted to do
Yeah.
that through Crafting Good too, because Crafting Good has always been a mission driven, social enterprise focused operation where, I mean, we have been donating must got a mouse in my pocket. I've been donating proceeds like since I started selling the boxes. That was the whole point. And so when I had been thinking about ways to streamline my giving to make sure like it's fully intentional, and you brought that up, I thought, oh my gosh. But then I loved, because Kristen will know, I've been having this podcast in my heart for like 5 years, and I didn't know what I would focus on the content about, and I didn't know like how I would come up with the funds of it, and I knew I couldn't produce it myself because it's too labor intensive for me, and I'm really bad at admin. I'm not bad at it. I just hate it. And so I was like, how am I going to have this podcast? So in our conversation, when we had coffee after that summit last year, and you were like, I think the first thing we should do is a podcast. I thought, oh my gosh, yes, let's do it.
Also, because like I don't think that this work lends itself. First of all, I liked your perspective because we like come together in ways that like clearly maintains the integrity of our businesses, but is also like super blended. The session series for me is sort of like more of a pass through at this point, and it'll, group programming is possible, but to get people comfortable with this work, and also for anybody who's not gonna join a program for whatever reason, sometimes it's financial, even if we're offering scholarships. So some people don't have the time. Like I was just presented with a really amazing opportunity, and I was like, oh my God, like my heart would die for this opportunity, but I also know that I don't have the time and capacity for it, and that would make me less healthy than I am today, and I'm gonna have to pass. And this format enables somebody who is on the train going to work for an hour and a half every day to get the information and hear different perspectives. And, as we move forward and can bring in more guests and more perspectives and more personalized stories, that's a little bit less focused on the pragmatic and more focused on the like emotional, personal, human connection side. Like you can't make that happen on Instagram. And you can't, I'm on Instagram. I see like a million things from different people. really even follow personal friends. It's like all practitioners in the field. And I just like kind of like scoot through it. And occasionally I'll like share a thing and I'm like, oh, that's like a really good thought. But like the work and the curiosity is long form.
Mm-hmm.
It's not short form. And so this just felt exactly like I think what we both needed.
Mm-hmm.
And if this helps one person
Right.
who's in that space, if this helps one person who's like, oh my God, I can go back to this thing. Because I have a couple podcasts where sometimes it's about the content. Sometimes it is, I just feel like a trust with the people.
Mm-hmm.
And if I'm in a hyper anxious place, or if I'm traveling for work and I have something come up and I'm like feeling that disconnection from home and I'm not feeling secure or safe, I can listen to that and their voices. And sometimes I'll listen to the same episode like on repeat, which yes, is one of my trauma cycles, but it's helpful to me.
Well, and too, I think though, when people are on purpose doing this kind of craft, and you
Mhm.
can tell the difference between like, people that might have a good message, but also their major intention is to get a lot of followers, make a ton of money, and you
Yeah.
can feel that too. When you have someone that just like shows up and just wants to bring things to light that maybe haven't been brought to light, and use their gifts in certain ways, use their perspectives in certain ways, and they're very much in their genius
Yeah.
zone, it's a living, breathing document to me. Like I can
Yeah.
listen to a podcast that hits a certain way the first time. I'm like, ooh, I want to go back and listen to what they said. But it's like
Yeah.
something else is like enlightened in me the next time, because it's this living, breathing, I'm different, they're different.
Exactly.
It's going to hit different. Yeah. It's
Like
cool.
you come off of one experience or a day where you're feeling a certain way and you listen to something, how you interpret every word, every inflection of the tone is going to be different than you do like on a high day versus a low day.
Mm-hmm.
So I totally agree with that. But I'm so grateful to have this space. I'm
Me too.
hopeful for next year in terms of what we can build with like partners and clients and guests. And I know we spoke last episode was a lot on anti-resolution. So I'm still on that track. I mean, this week is a week that I'm particularly focused on, not new year, new me, but a lot of like, okay, what intention am I setting? And is there like a daily ritual that I can shift to really meet myself in that moment? So,
Well, and I think what brought the two of us together is taking present moment decision making and intentions along the way that enabled the environment to come together to like conspire to help us meet, so we can both and amplify our own missions and the mission we create together. And so that's what we can do moving forward is
yeah.
more present moment alignment, more present moment decision making, and aligning to our intentions, and making mistakes and trying things out and staying curious and being vulnerable. And then we'll just kind of see where it goes.
Oh, that sounds good.
All right. Well, thanks everyone for joining us today on Human Sessions. It's been a real joy to share our upbringing and the ways we came together. And we'll see you in the next episode. Thank you so much for listening to Human Sessions. If you loved this episode, please make sure to subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or YouTube, and leave us a review on Apple Podcasts so more people can join our Human Sessions. We'll see you in the next episode.